Russia has invested years in building its military infrastructure, but in a coordinated triple strike, Ukraine obliterated key assets in a flash, delivering a synchronized three-pronged punch using weapons from the United States, the United Kingdom, and its own long-range arsenal. This was a series of large-scale attacks. A record number of Russian assets were wiped off the map, and Putin will never recover them. According to Ukrainian sources, such operations could become far more frequent, with even modest additional support from allies. We will cover the strikes in sequence, then explain what Kiev believes could enable them to shatter even more records going forward. Comment number 2 if you support Ukraine, number 3 if you support Russia, and number 4 if you love peace.
On March 9th, the Kyiv Post published an in-depth report on the three-pronged strike Ukraine delivered against Russia, beginning March 6 and extending through March 8th. This triple attack, all targeting facilities Russia had established in occupied Ukrainian territories, completely dismantled Putin's long-range Shahed drone strategy by destroying critical sites essential for operating those attack drones. Ukraine opted to shoot the archer rather than shoot the arrows, choosing to eliminate the drones at their source instead of attempting intercepts after launch. The most striking aspect is that Ukraine deployed one of its new indigenous weapons alongside some of the most powerful systems supplied by the U.S. and U.K. to execute these strikes. First, attention turns to Ukraine's Donetsk region, a long-time target for Putin since the invasion began, due in no small part to its mineral resources valued in the billions, if not trillions of dollars. The occupied Donetsk area was rocked by a massive wave of strikes in the pre-dawn hours of March 7. Building interiors were gutted. Secondary explosions were triggered, igniting fires and devastating industrial structures near Donetsk airport. Ukraine's objective in this initial wave were sites that the Armed Forces of Ukraine, AFU, claim Russia had used to launch Shahed drones against Ukraine since at least 2024. The Kyiv Independent also reported on these strikes, noting Ukraine unleashed a lethal combination of U.S.-made ATACMS missiles alongside British Storm Shadow or French Scalp missiles to destroy the targets. Ukraine's General Staff announced via telegram, "Today, ATACMS and Scalp missiles struck a site near Donetsk airport used by the enemy to store, prepare, and launch Shahed-type attack UAVs." It added, "The strike was carried out by missile and artillery units of the Ukrainian ground forces in coordination with Ukrainian Air Force aircraft." The accompanying post included video apparently captured by a reconnaissance UAV, documenting the devastating impacts from these Western weapons. Missiles were fired. They struck home. All that remained of the targets were smoking ruins on the ground, as thick black smoke billowed into the sky. Additional imagery later emerged, showing destroyed buildings at Donetsk airport, with smoke still rising well into daylight. This demonstrated that Russia had no answer for what Ukraine unleashed. Russian air defenses were penetrated with ease, allowing Ukraine to erase a launch site Russia had employed to send waves of attack UAVs into Ukrainian territory. Do not underestimate the importance of such strikes for Ukraine's defensive capabilities against Russia. As United 24 media reported on March 2nd, Russia deployed 5,059 long-range UAVs against Ukraine in February alone, a 13% increase over January launches. On March 10th, Business Insider noted that Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky stated Ukraine had faced more than 57,000 Shahed-type or equivalent drones against cities, infrastructure, and troops since Putin began the war. That equates to a rough average of over 1,187 UAVs per month, though the scale of Russian UAV attacks has escalated significantly since mid-2025. Given those figures, Ukraine's approach in the first Donetsk strike was clear. Destroy a launch site, and you degrade Russia's ability to fire Shahed drones. Employing Storm Shadow and ATACMS missiles also ensured damage so severe that Russia could not quickly repair the facility.
Of course, this does not eliminate Shahed UAVs from Russian hands entirely, but it means Putin's forces lost a launch point closer to priority targets than any other they control. Future Shaheds will have to travel farther, increasing the chances they will be intercepted before inflicting damage.
Did Russia acknowledge the Donetsk strike? Anyone familiar with Moscow's propaganda playbook knows the answer. The Russian Ministry of Defense made no mention of its Shahed launch site in Donetsk going up in flames, despite clear evidence of Ukraine's success. What it did report was downing 132 Ukrainian UAVs across various Russian regions that same night, including Samara, Volgograd, and Saratov, areas too distant from Donetsk for the usual UAV debris excuse to hold water. Even if offered, it would fall flat.
Storm Shadow and ATACMS missiles leave far larger craters than Ukrainian UAVs. When the standard excuse fails, Russia defaults to pretending nothing happened. Putin is like an ostrich with its head in the sand while its tail feathers burn, and Ukraine is far from finished with him or his forces in Donetsk. Ukraine had 2 more strikes in reserve. The third proved so painful it will sting Putin deeply. Stay tuned, we will explain exactly why. Regarding the second strike in Ukraine's triple combination, clues point to the location based on the first being the initial Donetsk wave. The second wave also targeted Donetsk, launched March 8, and featured a new domestically developed weapon tailored for such operations. The Pelikan missile took flight, wreaking havoc at the Tochmash plant in occupied Donetsk.
Located west of the airport, Ukraine had hammered with Western missiles hours earlier. The facility was struck in the pre-dawn hours, along with maintenance and storage sites, likely supporting the Shahed launch point hit previously. Significant additional damage was recorded. Initial imagery from central and northern districts of the city showed black smoke rising hundreds of meters from an industrial zone, the Kiev Post reported. Witnesses near the scene described hearing 2 massive explosions, if a weapon. This was no standard long-range UAV strike, of the type Ukraine has conducted repeatedly against Russia and occupied territories in the past.
The weapon Ukraine used against Tochmash was potent enough to ignite a major fire at a site some claim stored Shahed UAVs. Ukraine did not stop at the second wave. On March 8th, they followed with a second strike on Tochmash, a classic double tap so forceful it triggered secondary explosions after the initial hit. The Kyiv Post added that footage filmed by a nearby resident showed a 3-story industrial building with its central section completely destroyed. The facade collapsed, debris scattered in a pattern consistent with a powerful non-UAV explosion, delivered by a Pelikan missile. We will explain why that matters shortly.
Previously, the introduction of the Pelikan missile changed everything. So why is Pelikan significant? It can be summed up quickly. Pelikan is a ballistic missile, similar to ATACMS, but it is one Ukraine built domestically, meaning it faces none of the restrictions tied to Western-supplied missiles. When using Storm Shadow or ATACMS, Ukraine must seek prior approval before firing. With Pelikan, no such permission is required. Once a target is acquired, Ukraine can strike hard and fast, long before Russia detects anything incoming. That is precisely what occurred at Tochmash on March 8.
At least according to the Supernova Plus telegram channel cited by the Kyiv Post, which stated Ukraine fired FP-9 Pelikan missiles into Donetsk during the follow-up strike on Russian Shahed infrastructure. The sheer firepower this missile brings to such operations is immense for Ukraine. A single Pelikan can carry up to 850 kilograms, over 1,870 pounds, of high explosive, many times the payload of typical long-range UAVs, which deliver roughly 1/10 that destructive power. Little is publicly known about Pelikan, though United 24 media reported March 9th, immediately after the strike, that the new ballistic missile is believed to have a range of about 800 kilometers, around 497 miles. That exceeds the range of Storm Shadow and ATACMS used in the first strike, suggesting Ukraine developed Pelikan for strikes inside Russia proper, beyond occupied territories. As a high terminal velocity ballistic missile, Pelikan is extremely difficult for Russian air defenses to intercept. That may explain why Russia mounted no effective response to Ukraine's ballistic missile use in these strikes, though it could also stem from Russia's limited air defense assets remaining in Donetsk. Ukraine claims to have destroyed nearly 1,330 Russian air defense systems since Putin's invasion began, and that attrition is yielding results by making strikes like the one on Tachmash far easier. But that is not the main point. The headline from the second Donetsk raid is that Ukraine now possesses its own ballistic missiles. If manufacturer Firepoint is to be believed, this is a ballistic weapon capable of reaching deep into Moscow. Oh, and by the way, Ukraine hit more than just Tachmash in the second wave. Ukraine's Special Operations Forces added that their teams conducted a special operation, eliminating 3 Panzer S-1 air defense systems guarding approach routes used by Ukrainian missiles.
Do not worry, we are approaching the knockout blow in this 3-pronged punch. Before that, anyone care to guess how Russia acknowledged Ukraine's second successful strike on Shahed facilities in under 24 hours? If you said they didn't, congratulations. The Russian Ministry of Defense could muster only a feeble claim of downing at least 114 Ukrainian UAVs over Donetsk, Crimea, Volgograd, Kaluga, and Krasnodar regions. Russia also asserted it destroyed Ukrainian aircraft observed during these attacks, though no independent reports confirm that.
Chances are Russia hit no aircraft at all. They were too busy dealing with burning Shahed stockpiles to respond effectively. And that brings us to the third strike in Ukraine's combination. We dropped hints about its location. Ukraine targeted the village of Novozerne on occupied Crimea Peninsula around the time they were demolishing Shahed sites in Donetsk. This time, Ukraine struck a naval port facility near the village, destroying an armed patrol vessel, another blow to Russia's crumbling Black Sea fleet, which has utterly failed to control the sea named after it. Far more critically, Ukraine also hit Kirovsky airfield, where Russian forces deployed heavy Orion attack UAVs against Ukraine. In total, Ukraine eliminated 4 control stations for these powerful UAVs in the Crimea strike, along with the launch site itself, the Kyiv Post reported. As in Donetsk, Ukraine struck Crimea twice. On March 6th, the Kyiv Independent reported Ukrainian long-range UAVs continuing operations, hitting repair shops at the Yevpatoria aircraft repair plant and a pair of Pantsir S-2 air defense systems in Jankoy, northern Crimea. A pattern is emerging here, the same one seen in Donetsk. Ukraine first eliminates air defenses near intended targets. Once those systems are neutralized and safe air corridors established, powerful missiles and UAVs fly through. This approach evidently enabled the triple strike Ukraine executed over recent days, each time forcing Russia to expend millions of dollars on air defenses, only to follow with attacks that cripple Russia's long-range strategy. Shahed and Orion UAVs have been cleared from the skies because their launch points are smoldering. That reduces pressure on Ukrainian defenders. Less pressure means those troops can focus on the vital task of countering Russian ground forces. That alone justifies these 3 strikes. Anything Ukraine can do to mitigate the long-range UAV threat from Putin's forces benefits the country. The fact that at least one strike used a Ukrainian-made ballistic missile signals that Ukraine is building an independent long-range strategy, unbound by others, enabling harder strikes against Russia than ever before. One more intriguing element of Ukraine's recent hat trick concerns the Western missiles employed, as the Kyiv Post explained. The report noted that the strikes using ATACMS and Storm Shadow marked the first time the AFU claimed to have used British Storm Shadow and U.S.-made ATACMS in a complex, coordinated attack. In other words, past Ukrainian use of these weapons typically involved standalone launches against targets. This time, Ukraine combined Western missiles with long-range UAVs in a more sophisticated operation, mirroring Russia's attempts to blend Shahed drones and missiles.
Perhaps the Russian Ministry of Defense was truthful about downing hundreds of UAVs as Ukrainian missiles approached targets. Those UAVs may have been dispatched specifically to saturate and distract remaining Russian air defenses, diverting attention from incoming powerful missiles heading to key sites in occupied Donetsk and Crimea. That is speculation, but Putin and his commanders will be questioning how all this happened and why Russia could not stop a single Ukrainian missile. As for Ukraine's future, recall we promised to explain what Kyiv believes it needs to break more long-range attack records. Ukraine has stated its position repeatedly. More Western missiles mean more key Russian military nodes destroyed. What Ukraine achieved from March 6 to 8 was merely a taste of the pain it could inflict on Putin and his military if restrictions are lifted. More missiles, combined with no limits on Western weapon strikes, is all Ukraine needs to transform systems like Storm Shadow and ATACMS from effective weapons into true game-changers.
Unfortunately for Ukraine, the Western collective remains hesitant. Despite appeals to Britain, the U.S., France, and even Germany, the suppliers of missiles used in at least one of these strikes, those providers remain cautious about escalation with Russia. They will not supply missiles in quantities sufficient for far greater damage than observed. That is a bitter pill for Ukraine. But Kiev will keep pressing for more, and with Pelikan and other long-range weapons emerging, it will offset what some domestically view as lukewarm Western support. Expansion is on Ukraine's mind, as David Kirichenko wrote in a March 10th Forbes article. That expansion of long-range campaigns is exactly what to expect from Ukraine deeper into 2026. Kirichenko pointed out Ukraine has already struck as far as 1,300 kilometers, nearly 807 miles, into Russian territory this year.
He added that Ukraine is now hitting deeper into Russia with weapons far more powerful than past long-range UAVs. Millions invested in domestic missile production are yielding fruit, with weapons like Pelikan devastating Russia. More are coming soon. Whether that includes additional Western missiles as Ukraine hopes, Putin has been warned. Anything Russia has within 1,600 kilometers, 1,000 miles of Ukraine, is now a target. This time, it was Shahed facilities in occupied Ukrainian territories. Next time, domestic ballistic missiles and Ukraine's hybrid UAV cruise missile weapons could hunt even bigger prey deep inside Russia proper. Comment number 2 if you support Ukraine, number 3 if you support Russia, and number 4 if you love peace.